Okay, it's 2:30. We're going to get the study session started. Mike, do you have any comments, or are we going to turn it over to Ms. Pack right away?
Sorry, and I think my mic's on now. Yes, I'm going to quickly turn it over to Ms. Pack, but I think you all received an email indicating that Penny Bettles was unavailable unexpectedly. We did try to coordinate a little bit. We are on a very tight time frame, so we've got 3 people at least that I recognize here trying to take Penny's place, and told them that I would share that and maybe employ you for a little bit of grace as we try to pick our way through the SDI presentation.
Okay. Hey, Deb.
Thank you, Mike. And I just mentioned to him that I'm just going to do a quick overview of what the presentation was. I don't have the PowerPoint, but I did send you a copy of it in your packet on Thursday.
And I very diligently pulled it out of my packet because I didn't think we'd be doing it today. So I'll watch along. I've been through it once, and I'm sure Melanie can get me straightened out on anything I've missed.
Yeah, I don't think there'll be much that you don't remember. So real quickly, I just wanted to highlight that and some of this information, from what I understand, has changed since we got this information, so they will update that for us. At the current balance in the 2020 facade grant program for SDI was $19,021 at the printing of this program. I do understand that has changed, so they will update us on that. The funding sources for 2020 were, of course, the $95,000 that the city supported, $45,000 for operating budget, and $50,000 for the facade programming. They had a total funding source of $218,250 for 2020. For 2021, they had mentioned that they were going to decrease their request from the city by 5% due to COVID, which brings it a total of $90,250 request from the city. It does reduce their total revenues to $213,500. And their expected expenses to $240,800, which leaves them in a deficit of $27,300. That's about all I was going to do. So I'm going to turn it over to you all and let you talk about the changes.
Hello, I'm Cassie Strite. I am on the executive board for SDI, and I'm also a downtown business owner. You all know Mel. She is our amazing assistant with Salina Downtown. And then our president, Mindy Davison, is also here with us today. Hopefully Penny doesn't have COVID, and we do appreciate your grace. We do not have a slideshow, so Melissa, if you want a copy of this to look over, you feel good with it? Okay.
I'll do my best to keep up, thanks.
Like, Mel's always prepared. That's why we have her. We love her. Just a couple things that I do want to mention. The facade funding has completely been awarded. There is no more facade funding available for 2020. So, you all know the facade funding is exceptionally important to Salina Downtown. We've spent 2 years, almost 3 years under construction, and building owners have really taken advantage of that phase. There's been a lot of improvements to buildings. New businesses have come in. They've really used this facade funding to improve not only energy efficiency, but to go back and just revamp the life in their buildings and make it something that people want to come visit and want to come shop and spend their money at, which is good for everybody. Revenue dollars are always good for everybody. We did request a 5% decrease because we know everyone's budgets are super tight. Ours is as well. A couple years ago, the request was made that we spend down what was in our reserves, and we have done that. So we are reserve free, so to speak, at this point. We have invested in Salina Downtown. We have our truck. We have our downtown aesthetic specialist, Brendan Carr. He goes around and he makes sure, well, now that he's back from his furlough, he makes sure that weeds are pulled, that trash corrals are staying as clean as we can possibly keep them. He really just keeps downtown presentable. He's also taking on with volunteers, keeping the flower pots weed free, because we do know that's hard right now for the city. And I don't know, do you have, Oh, the stimulus package is something I do want to talk about because we did invest during the shutdown. We did invest quite a little bit of time and energy into our events and programming, the BOGO promo and the 25 for 25. It's on the second page of your flyer. Penny and Mel, they were great. They stayed on top of it. We did not expect this program to light like a match like it did. It actually, before they were able to shut it down, we had more purchasers than we had funds. So we had to dip into some of our entertainment fund or our advertising fund to help cover the cost of people that were purchasing gift cards to support downtown. As a business owner, that was huge. That helped me make or break some of my bills during our shutdown. It went from by the sweat of my brow to, okay, I got this for another month. We're gonna be all right. And it really has helped fuel with the reopening, people coming back into downtown and saying, hey, I got this gift card. And SDI was responsible for both of those programs, putting them together, finding the matching dollars and making sure that it was successful. So do you have anything else that we should talk about?
On the gift cards?
Anything at all?
I've got some clarification in kind of a broader sense, but first of all, I want to acknowledge that we've been working with SDI on a transfer agreement. They've been incredibly patient. The provisions of the whole Star Bond development agreement provide that the master developer will get reimbursed $200,000 first out of the CID proceeds. So we're still waiting for that to run its course before any additional funding might be available to distribute to SDI. But we do need to get a transferee agreement in place before those funds are available in anticipation of that. So we've been working with Penny and Mindy and Stuart and some other representatives of SDI. I think we have it in near final form to bring to you shortly. Kind of have a last round of legal review and need to send it to SDI, but it makes provision for some of the things that the ladies were describing in terms of, if you recall, the development agreement provided for maintenance, security, and programming funding for that, and identified SDI as the source initially to enter into an agreement with. So our estimates were $7.5, almost $7.6 million over the life of the Star Bonds, with 40.6% of that going to SDI, and that equating to an estimated $2.8 million over the life of the Star Bonds. Has yet to start. We've yet to get enough increment to get that going, but that's one provision. And then you may recall last year we had requests for funding for childcare, $100,000 for childcare, and that comes out of the Economic Development Fund that we have, along with payments to SDI and SEEDO and any type of funding that we would give for an economic development prospect. And so we talked then about the facade program is funded out of that economic development program. So I think one of the decision points or issues and options that we're going to bring forward to you is how we balance that economic development fund, just because I can already see the request exceeding the annual income as well as exceeding the balance in that fund. And so the other thing that I would tell you is, as part of the development agreement, there's the Community Improvement District sales tax that's estimated to generate $7.5 million. 18.9% of that is set aside for existing retail, so about $1.4 million over the life of the Star Bond. So that's funding intended not necessarily for facades in particular, but existing retailers and improvements to their facilities. I do think a case could be made on a case-by-case basis to fund a facade improvement through that. There's a larger portion, almost twice as much, set aside for new retail, 39.5%, and that's 2.9, right at $3 million estimated for new retail funding. And there's also the tax increment financing portion of the project, and that in total that's estimated to generate $4.8 million, with 53% of that, or $2.6 million, being for the new businesses, and then that $2 million that I identified for maintenance, security, and programming. So I don't want to surprise SDI as we start to bring all this into focus. I already know there's going to be an imbalance in the Economic Development Fund, and we're going to have some issues and options to bring forward to you. And part of the conversation last year was, can we transition from facade funding to STAR bond funding of those improvements? So
Those dollars that you were talking about, do they have to be retail businesses, or can it be service businesses also downtown?
it specifically says retail.
That's what I wanted.
Yep. And so each one of those would be a transferee agreement process. It would go through Salina 2020 as the master developer of the city, and then whatever that scope is would come to you as a governing body as a transferee agreement to be approved. So it'd be a little bit more formal than a facade program, probably more sizable project by project than what we've seen in the way of facade improvements. But the impacts of the facade program are noticeable in the downtown, no doubt. It's just a question of, do we continue that, or do we transition to the STAR bond approach? Well, you can do both if we can find the funds.
Okay, if I could back you up just a second, the 1.8 million and the 2.9 million, what are the sources on that? You said,
Okay, let me try to do that more systematically. If the CID, the Community Improvement District funding, is estimated to generate $7.6 million, and it's divided 4 ways. 40% of that essentially is maintenance, security, and programming, which would be the transfer agreement with SDI, and that's estimated to be $2.8 million over the life of the STAR bond project. 1%, or $50,000, was set aside for Old Chicago and their improvements to their location. 39.5% was set aside for new retail improvements, and that I estimated right at $3 million.
Okay.
18.9% was set aside for existing retail improvements, and that equates to $1.4 million.
So that's all CID money?
Yeah, that's all
Okay.
CID. Then tax increment financing was estimated to generate $4.8 million, almost 4.9. 800,000 of that was hotel TIF funding for the Homewood Suites. 21%, or $920,000, was set aside for downtown apartments, which we haven't heard a whole lot about lately. 6.9%, or $300,000, was set aside for the Old Chicago project, and then 53.8%, or $2.6 million, was set aside for new business improvements. So, admittedly, that new business aspect would be someone moving into the downtown, where the facade program could fund an existing business to make improvements.
Okay,
So
that sounds like a rather lengthy conversation to be had as to what each of those pots can be used for,
yeah,
and
the development agreement goes
who
into greater
administers them
detail.
is another question.
I'm sorry.
Who administers them is another question.
Yeah, the development agreement spells out a lot of detail about how they're to be used, and setting and allocating funds, and the city's accounting for each one of those. And then that's where there's an application made to the master developer, city staff vet that, and then it comes back to you in the form of a transferee agreement. But just to be clear, if you are currently an existing business in the downtown that would, in the future apply for a facade grant, the thing that would probably be most applicable out of everything that I just described would be that existing retail fund out of the CID at $1.4 million over the life of the project.
But if you're a new
I'm sorry.
business moving into an old location downtown, that would qualify under the new business
Correct.
segment, even though it's an old location.
Correct, and
Okay.
that would generate $5.6 million.
Okay.
And it could be more than just facade improvements. It can be interior renovation. It can be more extensive.
We did provide a list of who we had granted the facade monies to in your packet. So you can take a look at that and see who was existing, who was retail, who was service industry.
And I don't know if Debbie or Tara or Mike would have an idea, how close are we to hitting that $200,000 threshold on the developer reimbursement? I mean, are we?
We currently collected about $165,000 through June.
That's what I was thinking on your last report, but I just wanted to make sure. So, in all likelihood, we should hopefully get to that $200,000 mark before the end of 2020. So then at that point, monies will be flowing into the other funding. So at that point, monies are going to start accruing for the things that you broke down within the CID, correct?
Yep. Don't know that, we'll see if we hit the mark in terms of generating annually what we might have expected. But yes, at that point, it'll be divided into those different allocated uses, including maintenance, security, and programming for SDI.
Okay, and I guess my question is, since we've made those percentage allocations, I'm assuming that for every dollar, it's just going to add up like that. So even though we may start accruing monies in that fund in 2021, chances are it's not going to be enough to actually do a whole lot. I mean, am I characterizing that adequately? I mean, what do we expect to see from that fund annually? What was projected for that? 100,000?
In total or for SDI?
For the projects for SDI. I mean, in terms of like the new business, the existing business.
A little over 100,000 a year.
Okay.
The 27,005 that you're showing as a projected loss, that's coming from your reserves, is that right?
Yes.
And what are your reserves at this point?
We
had zero.
Zero.
We had to cash out a CD in June.
we took our CD and cashed it in so that we would have operating covered.
Okay.
Do you guys have any questions that you think that we could answer for you? We're not as on it as Penny, but we're trying.
Well, I have a whole page of questions, some of which just got answered. I was going to ask about how you were going to fund the differential, and according to your May report, that CD is about $53,000. So that should be sufficient to cover it.
Yeah.
I also noticed that your balance had been declining over the last year, but you answered that because you were asked to pull it down somewhat. So
Yes.
that's, I get that.
We were asked to spend it down.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Scragg, do we have a written agreement with Salina Downtown on this, or is this just kind of a informal thing? I mean, it's $250,000 or thereabouts, and it's starting to rise to the level where we maybe ought to formalize it. I know we've had agreements with them from time to time about different things.
Right.
I just don't know if the annual allotment is a part of that.
Well, and to be clear, that $85,000 that's mentioned with the service fee revenues, as you know, those are generated by the BID.
By the district itself,
By the district
yes.
itself.
Yeah.
Those are the fees collected.
So I believe this has been an annual budget allocation.
Okay. Do you guys have an annual audit or financial review, or somebody who is
We have it.
separate from the people who do your bookkeeping come in and look at the books occasionally?
We do have the people that do our books, Woods and Durham, here in town. They recommended not doing an annual audit this year, but doing one every 2 years, I
I
believe.
believe so, yes.
Okay, so it is a biannual thing then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And while we're on that topic, I've multiple agencies that we have agreements and we have an audit requirement that represents a sizable expense for them. So there's been a request to either alternate or take an alternate approach that's not a full-blown audit, that's not as expensive. So
I think they're going to do a review this year.
Yeah, I
And the
get
review
the
is about
expense
half.
part, because auditing can be very
It was
expensive if you go
$15,000 for
with
the
the
audit, I
full
believe, and
board.
$7,000 for the
So
review.
as we go into additional agreements, that's something we may need to consider
Yeah.
a different approach.
Does Woods and Durham prepare your monthly reports for you?
Yes.
So you have that?
They do everything.
that passed?
And which is why they said they don't feel that it's necessary to
Right.
do an audit every year because they're so hands-on, and they review everything
Essentially every month.
every 2 weeks. They do our
good.
books.
The audit wouldn't reveal anything.
Yeah, because I don't think it's always been like that, so that's
No,
good.
no,
It
So,
hasn't.
yeah.
We've switched to Woods and Durham middle of last year, first
Well,
of this year.
When Phil Klima was in office, then she did all of our books in office. And when Penny took over this position, she switched it to outside sources. So.
That's a good idea.
If I could double back to the agreement question, it looks like on file we have agreements from 2006 through 2011 for the facade program, and the 2011 did not automatically renew. It expired in December of 2011, and we don't have any formal
And I think
agreements
that
on.
applied to the supplemental money, not to the basic BID
Yeah,
fees.
it was the facade
Yeah,
program.
The facade program, yeah. Do you happen to know how many businesses are currently, no, let me ask this. How many separate locations are within the district? In other words, if everybody was full, how many businesses would we have in that district?
Well, I just sent out, I'm in the middle of sending out our ballots for our board elections
Right.
for this year. And between business owners and businesses, I'm sending out 253 letters.
Okay.
But I don't know what the exact breakdown
Okay.
between the two of those
And
is.
do you know what your vacancy rate is at this point?
I don't know percentage.
Things are kind of in a state of
Flux.
flux.
Yeah.
That's a good word, thank you. So, okay, all right.
Help me out here, do nonprofits pay the BID fund?
do not,
They do
no.
not, so that's the other thing to keep in
And
mind.
that's a large part of it,
Yeah.
especially with the hospital being down here.
KU School of Medicine and that, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, that would represent a significant hit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably $1,500, $2,000 in
course,
BID fees right there. I mean, of course, yeah, they're generating monies
They
another
weren't paying
way.
much as a vacant building.
Quite a
anyways.
significant number of not-for-profits down here.
Yeah.
And I will say that Penny and Mel do a great job of reaching out to outside businesses that are outside of the district, especially those that are just on the lip of the district. And they do a great job of securing partnership fees from them. So they can be an SDI partner, which isn't a huge number, but it's a lot of work and they do a good job of it.
We have, I think, around 15 outside businesses that partner with us. It's $200 a year to be a partner.
I want to say I'm a supporter. I like the idea. I would rather spend money at a local business owned locally than at a big box or a franchise, just in me. And the other thing that, you know, a long time ago, somebody told me, I don't remember who it was, but I thought it was profound at the time, and I still do. It says, you know, if you think about your hometown, what do you think of? You think of Main Street or whatever that main business district is, because that's just the image we carry, and visitors to the community also remember us that way. Wasn't long ago that it was a year ago, but I was at a music festival in Paola, and the person behind me happened to be from Overland Park, and there was a break, and we just kind of talked, and he says, oh yeah, Salina, they've got that Italian place across from the theater. Now, he didn't remember the name of the place, but he had a very definite image of Salina as being that entertainment and that food, and I thought that was very, very heartening to hear that we create that kind of an image on visitors.
And from a business owner's standpoint, the last 2 years of construction was, it was rough, but we've all rallied around each other with that very sentiment in mind, that we wanted to be what people remembered about downtown was our businesses, the way we made them feel welcome, the environment that we have in downtown, and we've all stuck it out and worked really hard to make sure that that happens.
I would add to that, going into the project, staff intentionally tried to reach out to communities that have been through a downtown renovation like that to try to learn any tips on how to mitigate that, but more so to just get a sense of what to anticipate. And the patience shown by the downtown businesses exceeded expectations. They've been great to work with.
Thank you, because sometimes we didn't feel like we were very patient, but thank you.
Thank you.
So basically, the funding request is the same as it was for
5%.
last year, which is
5%
basically a
less.
$95,000 package total. And, I mean, I kind of think that that's a discussion, hello, Fly, that we, we need to have when we're looking at our sales tax, economic, development fund. Where do we feel collectively where we're going to get the biggest bang for our investment? And, you really have shown us very clearly the kind of return on investment that we see from the funds that have been allocated to you. So I'd thank you for that.
Thank you, Melissa.
Do you have any other questions for us?
Good job, ladies.
Thank you.
You did well. Thank you.
Mr. Hobbit.
If you could let Penny know that we didn't disgrace her.
Let me get out my phone. Oh, my God.
She's actually probably sleeping because I think she has maybe 4 functional hours in her a day right now. But thank you very
Thanks,
much for
guys.
hearing us.
Good job.
We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to what we didn't finish last week, which was the comprehensive fee schedule. Top 10 fee revenues, water fees, wastewater fees, EMS fees, solid waste sanitation, municipal court golf, parks and rec fees, Kenwood Cove and building and inspection fees. As you may or may not recall, the comprehensive fee schedule is approved by resolution. We typically take what the average CPI is and try to increase our fees annually by 2 to 3% just to stay up with inflation. There are some fees that are not set through the comprehensive fee because they're either set through statute or through the judge or through other means. The wastewater and water fees are looked at later in the fall after the summer activity can be allocated to the fund. And also the recreation fees for programming are not done through the comprehensive fee schedule. They're done through their own comprehensive fee plan.
Would there be a chance of getting a copy of those fees, though, even though they're not in our packet?
Of the parks fees?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
And if I could piggyback on that really quickly, a question that came up to me, and I don't mean to derail your presentation, Debbie, but after the mayor asked about parks and rec fees, if we could get some information in terms of participation in different programs. I know obviously we don't have this year because we're not doing it, but sometimes, as we've been hearing from the soccer families, it would help me to know how many people were really talking about.
Sure. I think we have some of that information from some prior
Study session.
sessions that we've given you. We may not have the specific fees, but they'll have them in their program. So then we look at CPI based on the urban consumers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you can see from this, it's gone way down, but that average over the last 12-month period is about 1.64%. The fees that we wanted to bring forward specifically to you, and you'll get a copy of the entire fee schedule. If I didn't give it to you, I meant to, but I will, are the fees that are anticipated to increase either more than 5% or more than $1. As you can see, there are several in the cemetery. Mostly those are in the 2% range, but because they're over $1, they're listed here. We have some animal services fees that are increasing, specifically the surrender fees, the pit bull fees, some of those that are increasing significantly.
Debbie, just, if we have questions about specific line items, we should save that for the end of the month, early August discussion time?
If the department head is here, you're welcome to ask him now, because we
Yeah.
will be looking at this on Wednesday at our study session to kind of make some decisions. So if you have
And-
questions, this would probably be the time to.
Right, if it's information that's helpful and you making that
If we don't have it, we can get it
go
at
ahead and
least
ask
for
it now.
Wednesday.
Okay, I was just curious as to why, for the application under dog permits, I'm assuming generically the pit bull is functionally considered a dangerous dog in the city? And I'm wondering why we separated those two out.
Actually by code, a dangerous dog is a pit bull is assumed dangerous because of its breed. Dangerous dogs have had incidents to the point that the judge has declared them to be dangerous, and there's a different process in terms of permitting and maintaining them, licensing them, that type of thing.
All right, thank you.
And yeah, maybe on Wednesday we can talk too about, I'm all for doing our best to recoup our expenses, but the bottom line too is we want to have these animals registered, and it kind of goes along with the surrender fees. I mean, $2 seems, very low to surrender a dog, but at the same time, I want people to be choosing to bring their animals to the animal shelter instead of just dumping them in the country.
So that's what it costs to drop a dog off. At that point, you might as well just make it free.
Well, yeah, I
Well,
mean,
we're
yeah.
raising it.
Yeah.
Yeah. but-
So,
Then the next department that we have some raises in is well, these are not raises, these are decreases actually. And based on a contract that we awarded for towing, a lot of these fees are going down, so that we're recouping the cost that we're paying for some of these services that are being provided by the tow truck drivers. Public Works are going up, not significant, most of these are just going up $1 or something, but that makes it, because they're low fees, that makes the percentages look a little higher than the 5%.
and, okay. I saw Deputy Chief back there, because I know that we had received a question about the cost of police reports and about, some communities, if you are just available to access them online, don't have a fee if the consumer can take care of that for themselves.
Sure,
And-
like the accident reports,
Right,
that's
right.
done online, but with the case files, the accident reports actually go into that system, so they're all there to be accessed, whereas our case reports are in-house and that functionality
That's
is
a
not there.
completely different.
Yeah.
That's, okay. But they can get the reports they need for, on just like, when you do have.
So, yeah, if they
an
come to
incident.
the station to make an open records request, or if they want a copy of a police report that they made for their insurance or something.
Right.
Yeah, they can either come in, call, we can mail it.
Okay.
Is that
And
what
that's
you're referring-
$15
What?
as well?
I'm sorry, I think the question is what's available online?
Yeah,
And
like,
for, at no fee?
yeah, i.e. if I just needed to get a police report for insurance, is there any way that
Unless
I
it's
could
an
just
accident-
access?
Unless it's an accident, you cannot.
Okay, okay.
And the $15 is for digital items such as photographs or videos, things of that nature.
Okay, okay. So the actual police report is still $10 for like insurance purposes? I think that's what it was prior? Okay, thank you.
I had a quick question on the record pricing, because that's what the amounts you have there is what we're being charged by the record service and stuff.
That's correct.
Do we have any administrative
There is
work
not.
that we have to do on that we should be, I hate to use the word upcharging, that we should be charging for our time on top of
Essentially,
that?
what that covers, and I think how it originally came about, was when there was an accident and the driver requested a wrecker, that it was kind of the prices as far as us calling them was all over the place. So there was we were wanting some standardization. If we were making that call, then what fee are you going to charge these folks? Because sometimes it was getting to be pretty high. So every 2 years, and it's about that time, come the fall, that they're asked, the record companies that want to participate in the on-call rotation, what they will charge the public for coming out to pick up a vehicle on a police department on-call list. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
the only thing we're doing is making a phone call.
Okay, that's what I was
And I think
asking.
the key to
Perfect,
that
okay.
standardization is if you're a citizen that doesn't know who to call and you ask the police department, we were on a rotation. Well, without standardized pricing, one person we may call a tow company with a sizably greater cost than another. So we
some of
created
that-
a process to standardize that amount.
And some of that went back to that we would be getting called, reference, the price they were being charged, and, people were concerned with regards to that price, and so this seemed to be a good way to standardize it when we're making those calls for them. Certainly on an accident scene, if somebody has a preference, we'll call their preference for them, and then that's whatever fee they charge at that time.
Thank you.
And why the prices had gone down is we failed, the police department did, to get those lower prices added into this year's list. Now, the record companies, as far as I know, have been charging what was the agreed upon amount. This was to document what that fee was to be.
So essentially, this list was wrong, and it's being corrected at this point to match what we're actually doing.
Although, as I mentioned, that's coming up to go out to bid again come come this fall. It's every
Deputy Chief,
2 years.
just one last question. For the actual police report for a motor vehicle accident, is separate from what's listed here? What was the $10 fee
The
that you?
$10 is just like if you have to call and get a police report to submit to your insurance company.
Be that for accident, stolen something, or just any police report?
I believe so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
The Commissioner Hodges had referenced a report that is still $10, and I was just wondering which report that is and how it's different from what's listed here under police reports.
As far as I know, both for accident and police reports, we charge the same amount for both. Can you tell me what page you're on?
I'm sorry,
It's
page
not in here, I
6,
don't
think. Okay.
at the very top.
The other one's not on here.
Okay.
I'll have to look in the comprehensive fee schedule to see where that other one's listed and check with Deputy Chief to see if that one was changed significantly.
Okay, so if I call the police report because, I don't know, somebody threw something against my garage door and I needed a report for insurance, that would be the same report
From what, yeah,
as
and I actually
car
have
accident report or,
copies of reports are $10 each. So an accident or a criminal case, yes, $10 each.
okay.
One can be obtained, well, both of them can be obtained from us directly, but we normally ask people to go to the online site for accidents just because it's self-serve in that you can pay and obtain the accident report via the online site. And as far as the criminal cases, you can email a request, you can come in, you can call, we can mail those to you, and then that's $10 as well.
Okay. This is going to sound like a philosophical, well, it is a philosophical question. If that report is part of police duty, why do we charge for the report at all?
I guess,
If you need till Wednesday to answer, that's fine.
well, I think in its most basic, there's a lot of things that we produce as part of our normal course of business, but then reproducing that or printing it and the staff time to do that is what, for any open records request, there's a permissible fee to cover the cost of producing it in response to the request. So just because an officer typed up a report to then take a citizen's request and process that request and deliver it to them, there's work and cost above and beyond what the officer did on the scene or...
Because the report has to be produced anyway, whether no one ever requested a copy of it.
It has to be logged into the system.
Well, into the
but,
system, right.
There may be attachments, there may be photographs to be printed, all that needs to then be printed and produced.
Right, so if we're spending time processing, I can see that. So this is not just a report that has all that stuff already combined into one report anyway? I mean, like a picture of the accident?
Sometimes there's research involved, but in your example that you gave, that you had some damage to your garage door, that would be fairly simple to find just by, you probably have the case number, and we could produce the report for you, photographs as well, without too much research. Sometimes you may have something that involves multiple cases, maybe an accident or something else, so there might be a little more research because somebody doesn't have a case number or name or location, date and time, things of that nature. So it takes a little research on our part.
So it just spreads the total cost over the whole year. So this is the average amount of time it takes to
Yeah,
generate
I've called it up in the comprehensive fee schedule, and under police reports, there's an inspection report at $10, a copied report at $10, copied and mailed report at $15, electronic photos including media, which is the item that's on the PowerPoint at $9, and there's a footnote that the above fee includes the first 15 minutes of retrieval time. There will be additional charges for each additional 15 minutes or portion thereof required to provide the record. So it's trying to anticipate the amount of effort associated with responding and then charge for that.
And to be fair, even if somebody accesses their own information through the online system, there is the $10 charge. Right.
That's correct.
And I understand the point there. In terms of-
I mean, it's already, yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Any other questions on police? Okay. I'll start to talk about public works. Most of those, like I said, are pretty small amounts, just the percentages have gone over that net change amount. Also in public works, we have the landfill, which has increases on both. They decreased the poundage but increased the fee on this. So the decrease of 500 pounds, up to 500 pounds for $10, but then the charge of anything over 500 pounds was changed to $40. And then there's some other pretty small dollar amounts, but looks like, appears to be larger percentage-wise, fee changes in the landfill.
And I think the staff explained the reasoning for the changing the pounds instead of the dollars. Someone comes up with any truckload under that limit, then it's just a flat $10 rather than $10.20 or some awkward number.
Any other questions or other information that we can provide you on the comprehensive fee schedule, other than the entire schedule? Next, we wanted to look at the all funds summary. When we were here a few weeks ago, we talked about operating budgets on the department side. And today we're going to go over all funds for revenues and expenditures. So the first fund is the 2021 budget for the general fund. The revenues, as you can see, we're budgeting those at 0.38% less than 2019. And as Mr. Scragg had mentioned before, what we did in revenues, not knowing due to COVID kind of where everything was going to fall, we went back to the 2019 numbers and kind of started budgeting at that point. I will note that Commissioner Franz noted that some of the detail percentages are off, so there's some calculation incorrections in there, so I'll check those and get those corrected for you. General fund expenditures, we have those increasing from 2019, 3.07%. We do have that going down from the 2020 original budget of 2.53%. And you will notice on here, on this particular page, we are showing the fund balance from the original projection that we did back in April. So we're still showing that that's going to be a negative, a net loss in 2020. And as you know, our numbers have changed every month. So this was just like a basic thing. So I would pay more attention to the net income and loss line than I would to the fund balance line on that particular fund, because we are doing projections every month, and that number is changing every month. So then we wanted to provide you just the detail by department for the general fund, and I tried to give you some notes as far as what were significant changes in each of those particular areas. I won't go through each one, but if you have notes or questions about any of those specific departments, I'd be glad to either try to answer it, or if the department's heads here, they can certainly answer it. Did you have any notes on the general fund? I will make note too that when we looked at the net income for the general fund that we were budgeting, it appears that we're at $900,000 to the good. But one note that I wanted to remind you is that because OCCK reduced their request for 2020, that's about a $350,000 number. And so we're trying to capture that. And so that's kind of one of our goals, is to have that amount set aside for 2020, because that's going to change or 2021. That's going to go away, obviously, in 2022. And then we were trying to have some budget, or trying to add to that fund balance about $500,000 for that year. So that's kind of where our goal was for that, for 2021.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair description to say we're trying to capture it. Another way I'd put it is we're trying not to grow into it and then and not have it available in the coming year.
Exactly. Any other questions about the general fund? I will too note that I left at your spots. Commissioner Franz had requested some detail on the operating, some of the items in the operating fund, so I provided what I had available for you, so that if you have questions on that, we could answer those.
I think it was a detail on contractual service, or other contractual services, which is kind of this.
Yeah, something that was non-specific to
Yeah.
something you might know what it is. So I tried to provide those to you. I didn't have every one of them, but I did provide you what I had on those. So if you have questions on those between now and Wednesday, just let us
A
know.
lot of these look like they're IT stuff.
Yes.
Very much so. And
Very much so.
It is a big ticket item. The computer technology department tries to keep an inventory of the various softwares and licenses that we have across the organization. We did go through it line by line, and we've gone through each one of these line items in detail, and we've literally talked 500 here and 1,000 there, and it's amazing for how big of a budget we have, how little room for movement we identified.
Then we've provided the Arts and Humanities Fund on slide 16. We do recognize that the revenue for 2020 will need to be adjusted. We have not come up with that number yet, but in looking at the revenue that they've gotten so far to date, I don't anticipate that the transfer will be significantly more, even if they budget to the full budgeted amount for the revised budget amount, because they've brought in about $20,000. We have budgeted to transfer $645,000, so that almost gets them to that amount. That transfer could have to go up based on if we get any additional revenue outside of that transfer, or if the revenues come in differently than what we're projecting. Sales tax capital fund, we're projecting a decrease in expenditures from 2019 to 2021 of about 6.2%. A lot of that is in transfers, and that is because the debt, we did budget for debt in 2020, a payment for the police training facility, and it was not bonded, so we did not need that. So we're not budgeting that in the 2021 budget because it's not bonded yet either. Sales tax economic development, this is the fund that Mr. Scragg was mentioning earlier. This is where SCEDO, SDI, and our Save a Lot tax reimbursement or rebate comes from. We're budgeting a net loss of $25,000. Another concerning fund for us. Depending on what the sales tax does, that fund can shift either way.
And I would mention, I think everyone's aware, but this is also if we have an economic development prospect and we're asked to match, say, a KDOT grant, or asked to provide funding to an economic development prospect, this fund funds that as well. So we have kind of ongoing annual commitments, and then we are trying to maintain a balance to be available for economic development projects.
You know, one of the questions I had in relation to SDI, although it doesn't affect them directly, except that they get some of this economic development money, is we have never established any kind of standard processing. In other words, if SDI comes and asks for economic development money, they come to us as a part of the budget process. Some folks go to the Economic Development Organization. Sometimes they have to fill out a form, sometimes they don't. I don't know what the criteria are, and it just seems like we ought to spend some time trying to focus on identifying what that process should be so that everybody starts from the same point of departure. That's just never been done. It's kind of been whoever asks and how they ask, they'll get treated differently. So I'm just thinking that at some point in the not too distant future, we ought to try to standardize that process so that, you know, if SDI is asking for economic development money, they go through the same process as child care, as the chamber would for their, I think it was part of their web page that they were given some money for, or whatever, that they all go through the same process, subject to the same criteria as all the other applicants.
Yeah. You could certainly say the SEEDO serves in that role. The consistency makes sense. I think currently the organizations that had a pre-existing relationship with the city before SEEDO are the ones that we've continued to take directly versus
and one of those was SDI.
Right.
You know.
But we could certainly direct everything through the.
I
through
just think
SEO.
that's a decision we ought to make explicitly, so at least we have, everybody has a foundation for understanding what it is that is expected.
And just to kind of continuing along that line, I agree that it would be really helpful to have all those expectations set out someplace, and it even goes further to that in terms of our economic development policies in general, in terms of, I mean, I'm looking at this ending fund balance of, for 2020 of 700,000, and one significant prospect could totally put us in the negative for that. So, to me, just as a commissioner, it would help me if we had guidelines for our policies so that we were making kind of consistent decisions, or at least understanding that every commission looks at it in a different way, at least if you've got some stated goals that you want to see happen from those policies, or measures, or returns on investment, or whatever. I think it would be nice to be able to have that spoken to.
Yeah, admittedly, that's been a standing goal for a while. We have inventoried them all. We do have quite a few policies in place, but they're outdated. The IRB policy, as an example, dates back to the 1990s with investment levels that the numbers still correspond to the 1990s. So staff has gotten as far as consolidating all the policies that we do have and getting that kind of communicated, but it merits coming back and reviewing the policies themselves and our goals for each of them.
The next fund is the Business Improvement District Fund. That's a straight pass-through. We do the billing for them. They set the fees, we do the billing, and we reimburse them or send that money directly to them. The Tourism Fund is the next fund. We currently have this budgeted at the same level that we do in 2019. This is a pass-through also, part to CVB and part to TPAC for their debt and for some operating funding. Special Parks and Recreation Fund. This is the fund that gets alcohol tax. You did bring up the question when we talked about this before about we were recommending that we purchase some vehicles out of this and possibly doing some lease financing out of this. I did go back, and in 2005, the city actually issued bonds for HVAC at the TPEC Center and paid for those bonds out of this fund. Don't tell me if it was right or wrong, I'm just telling you that has happened historically. So I think there's the possibility, and we spoke about this before, the language in the statute I think allows for that to happen. What we've budgeted in here is actually what we put on the sub-CIP for the mowers for the Parks Department. Special Alcohol is a pass-through fund. Those are the entities that supply us applications, and we send those out to them. Special Gas Fund. This is where a significant amount of our streets projects are performed out of. We have been trying to budget our expenditures a little bit higher than our revenues in order to try to use some of that fund balance. And in order to spend more money out of this fund and less money out of the sales tax fund. So we're trying to increase that expenditure revenue, that expenditure each year. Neighborhood Park Development Fund. This is a pretty minimal fund, but it's really specific in how it can be spent. The dollars that come in from mortgage registrations or some sort of fees off of mortgages, and they must be spent in the neighborhood in which the revenue was collected. So it's very specific about if I collect $100 in this specific neighborhood, I have to spend those dollars in that neighborhood. So that's why you'll see this fund doesn't get used, because it doesn't earn a lot of money, and it doesn't allow for very big projects in those particular neighborhoods.
We try to aggregate those funds, but there's also a time limit on them, that if they're not used, the funds have to be returned. So as we approach the time limit, then we do our best to come up with an eligible expenditure.
Right.
It has to be something permanent, or could it be maintenance, mowing?
I'm not sure.
It's always been presumed to be improvement, but
Yeah,
I'd have to go back
I
and
think
look
it
at that
says
language.
improvements as opposed to maintenance,
Yeah.
but check the language. The understanding always was it would be a playground or, something tangible.
The TPEC fund, that's exactly what it is. There's money transferred into this fund to support the operations of the TPEC Center by Spectra. That number is pretty insignificant. We get part of that from the general fund and part of it from transient guest. The expenditures have been pretty consistent over the years in that fund. Sanitation fund. This fund is being budgeted, it looks like it's significantly up, but as you recall, our proposal has been to take the purchase of the carts out of this fund. It was originally in 2020, well, it wasn't in 2020, but we do have that budgeted in the 2021 budget. So that number is going to increase our expenditures, and we also have the expenditures for the purchase of the vehicles, which, depending on when those are funded, may or may not come out at this time.
Those would be debt finance, but the debt payments would commence.
The solid waste
First
fund,
in my
Not even sure how to answer that.
yeah. Solid waste fund, we have the revenues going down just slightly in that fund based on current prior year or 2019 revenues. And expenditures are also going down in that fund a little, about 9%.
I presume the fund balance here does not include the reserve fund, the capital reserve fund?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Quick question on the TPEC. How do we expect that to look this year with the reduced?
They reduced some of their revenues.
I'm sitting here looking at it, I'm just like,
Well, they
how do
very
we think that
proactively-
because
They very proactively reduced their expenditures, both in terms of staff and materials and utilities, and submitted a plan at the outset of how they're going to do that and try to monitor revenue. They, as
were
Sylvia
they
Rice
able to get a
mentioned.
PPP loan? Did they fall under that
That I
category?
don't know.
I mean, I'm just trying to think if they fell into that category where they could get the PPP loan that would help offset their, because as we know, the income there has been minimal, if any.
Knowing what they did with staffing, I assume they probably didn't do a PPP loan, but they have been trying to be mindful of, what scheduling is getting pushed out and canceled and managed to it to the best of their abilities. Beyond that, I don't know.
And I'm not sure if they provided dollars in that presentation, but I can certainly look and see if we can compare it to where we would have been in a prior year. The wastewater water fund, let's see where forgot the golf fund. Golf fund, we have that revenue down just slightly and the expenditures down just slightly in that fund, but we're still trying to reach that target. The wastewater fund, we're budgeting that revenue just slightly less than 2019, and we're increasing that expenditures a little bit over 2019. Workers' comp, we intentionally reduced the transfer out of, for this one, we transfer dollars out of every fund based on the number of employees that are in each of those funds. We intentionally reduced that for two reasons. One, because of the comment about getting to our targets, and that target balance was getting up there a lot higher than the target, and also to ease some of the expense on those particular funds. The health insurance fund, we did include a 4% increase in premiums, so we did include that in the revenue estimates here. We wanted to kind of show you what effect that has on the fund. With a 4% increase, the expense side of that is $5.2 million. Without one, it's about $5 million, so it's a little under $200,000 difference with or without the 4% increase. That target fund balance is looking good, but with COVID-19, we do not know what those claims are going to look like. So that's one of the ones that we'll be bringing back to you on issues and options, whether to increase that premium or not.
You may recall that we previously discontinued payments into the health fund based on the fund balance, trying to manage it down to the goal and help sustain the general fund. We weren't able to reduce that payment as long as we thought because of performance in the health fund. Now at the beginning of 2020, performance looks pretty good. However, once deductibles are met, then spending starts to pick up again. So it fluctuates. We're trying to monitor it and manage it the best we can, but it's far from an exact science.
What month does our year begin? Is it?
February.
February, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
You must have, anticipated my question. I'm all for rolling those expenses back for 2021 and try to manage to that $2 million budgetarily. That returns about $750,000 to the general fund, and that's a lot of money to leave on the table. The $2 million's not a minimum, it's a target. And I wouldn't be surprised to go under that sometimes, and that's okay as long as we try to manage back to it. To the extent that those monies are returned to the contributing funds, it's still there. If mid-year we have to increase contributions to the health fund, we can do that. That's within our power.
If we want to, and I don't disagree, if we want to pursue that, we probably need to formalize it a little bit more than we did the last time because it's...
I agree. I'm suggesting we do that as part of the budgetary process and that we change the city contributions as well as the employee contributions and so on.
Well, we also have some ancillary agencies that participate as well.
I think it needs to be done across the board if we do that.
And I'm not disagreeing. The difficulty is, as things fluctuate throughout the year, we need to set expectations correctly. And I'm kind of thinking out loud here, so that it may not be the new rate. It may be a rebate. It may be a discount because depending on performance, we may need to go back to the original rate.
I was going to say, is there a way to do it? Because I know this last year we had those additional claims at the end. Is there a way to do it, to not do anything until we get towards the end of the year?
That's why I say as
Whether it's
a rebate or something like that.
Rebate,
we may
however
be able
we
to
do
true
that, it
up
would be
and
nice.
make a distribution versus...
That way we're not doing something and have to backtrack it.
And creating confusion about the rate that's in effect, and it went up, it went down, it's going back up again.
That would be...
Right.
But I agree, we need to
I
manage that
I hate to
balance
leave
to
that money
something.
on the table, in that way.
But you don't really know what your year-end expenses are until like February, though, because a lot of people they get a lot of medical stuff done in December.
Once they get their
They'll see the end of their plan year
Yeah.
approaching, and, yep.
Or they'll meet their deductible as,
Deductible, and then they have.
and then they
things
decide to
that-
do it all.
Off to the races,
So,
right?
Yeah. Okay, we can certainly look at that. Central Garage Fund is staying pretty flat. We anticipate that fund balance to go up just slightly in 2021. The bond and interest fund, we had the conversation a couple weeks ago about that target, and I did look up that. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about this on slide 36, but I did put the target at $1 million only because it's currently $200,000, only because we're going to discuss it in a minute. This fund, we have revenues going up a little bit, and we're trying to get that net income or loss to get not so dramatic, as we can get it as close as we possibly can. But we will talk more about that in a little bit. Another option that we looked at, or we talked about the last time, was the police training facility and the sales tax fund. So I provided this again. This is debt service analysis. So this is the payments that we have out on projects, including the 2021 the projects that'll be funded in 2021, which are listed on slide 35. And then in the bottom section of this, the revenue that has to support that. And you'll notice that, for example, property tax projects don't tie out to property tax revenue, and that's because there's some other revenues that supplement that in order to pay for that, like motor vehicle tax. We have some transient guest tax coming in here for the bicentennial debt, and some transfers and things like that. So this is just informational to see how those numbers would look with these new projects that are being funded in 2021. So then I wanted to break down the numbers, if we included the police training facility into the property tax section instead of sales tax. The benefits it gives us, we could fund that for over 20 years instead of over 15. And that annual debt payment would be about $440,000. And you can see in the bottom table, the orange and the green table, that the change between those two numbers is that $440,000 a year that would be required from property tax. And as we talk about the debt service fund, this is where I put together the numbers for the target balance. Our policy says anywhere between 10 but not more than 15% of the principal and interest payments in that fund. So this is the maximum targets for these particular years, and these are the current debt payments without any additional bonding, any additional debt. So as you can see, they range anywhere from $900 to over $1 million. So my recommendation is that for 2021, we stay at a maximum fund balance of $1 million. This one, the debt service funding options, I included the beginning fund balance at 2021. We estimate that's going to be about $1.4 million. The property tax that's required, and I showed if we left the mill levy the same as it is currently, this is the taxes that we would collect, so our fund balance would start to go up as we went out. Then some years it's going to go down because we have more debt to pay. So this just shows you if we didn't change the mill levy, kind of what our balance would do.
And this includes the police facility in that?
Yes.
So it looks like if we did that, we could sustain that $1 million target in all years except 2025, and it would be very close in that year.
Yes.
And not change the mill levy.
Correct. That's without
Okay.
any additional debt, though, which is
Right.
hard to do.
So
So then I wanted to bring forward this next table, which shows what would our future capacity be if we did the same thing. We left the mill levy at the current rate. We funded the police training facility. What would we have the ability to fund in the outgoing years? So I just took a $2 million project amount because it fit into the numbers fairly well. And as you can see, if we did that, we would drop our fund balance significantly in 2026, 27, 28, 29, but it'd start to come back up. And we wouldn't necessarily have to do $2 million every year. So we have some capability, some capacity, I believe, to move forward with that plan.
And you have a $4 million project assumed in 2034,
Yes,
and the fund balance is still healthy
yes,
in the out years.
yeah. Because I think when you look at that debt financing, you have to look forward too, because it's not like we're going to come every year and never finance any projects. Because we know we have streets projects, we know we have budget. I believe we've probably funded our big projects for a while, but you never know. Something might come up.
So I think the point was made previously with this group, but the sales tax assumptions that went into the ballot language and the financial assumptions didn't include the police training facility. That was an add-on ancillary to that ballot initiative and the assumed numbers that went into that. So if we could see our way clear to do the police training facility out of general fund debt, it doesn't solve all the issues in the sales tax fund, but it gets it a little bit further back on track.
Well, and one of the things I think when we were always looking at this, in the back of our mind, we always had the shilling remediation. And we believe that we have come up with a plan where we're going to have $0 that are going to need to come out. I mean, at some point, we may want to just be aware that there's always that potential that we miss that mark, but I think at one point we were looking at this, looking at a $9 or a $10 million, cost to the city, so.
And we tried to set some of that aside in utility, but we did not rule out the possibility of having to support it with the property tax.
The other thing to consider on this is the training facility is not necessarily an all or nothing proposal. In other words, we could, if we choose for 1 or 2 or 3 years or 5 years, fund 50% property tax, 50% sales tax. We still have those choices we can make each year as we move forward. So it's not like if we start doing it now in 5 years, it has to continue exactly that way. We've got the freedom to adjust that.
We can change how we are.
All the bondholders care about is that they get their money. They really don't care which pocket we take it out of,
That's a good point, because usually when we get started, that's where we stay.
Right, that's correct.
That's a good point, Commissioner Fran.
That brings us to the sales tax capital fund. You've seen this before. We kind of have split out what we kind of committed ourselves to, and then kind of where our discretionary spending lies. Truth be told, those are committed costs that we've had, so bonds or something like that we've got already committed to. And then the discretionary is obviously any of the other funding that we approve year by year. So I wanted to show you, this is the table we've seen many times. The first table is as we've previously presented it, with the police training facility included in the numbers. And as we know, with what we want to do, with what our goals are for the river renewal. Now, the river renewal, the timing may change a little bit, but overall the dollars probably wouldn't. That would put this fund into the negative if we leave the police training facility there. So if we leave it here, we're going to have to change our assumptions on some of the other things that we might do. The second slide with this is without the police training facility, so on page 41. So if we take the debt out for the police training facility, you can see that this fund then can support the $12 million in construction on the river project, and has a little bit of, it shows it'll go negative before we get to the end, but I believe with assumptions that we're making, that probably will get covered with revenues or something like that, or we could change some of those other assumptions. For example, the stabilization number or something like that to make that number zero out. I just wanted to give you the graphic of what that would look like.
And given that the 2016 sales tax extension was one of the key features of that was the river renewal. And I really feel like we've got an obligation to the voters to maintain that commitment. So if, as Commissioner France said, it makes sense to fund the police training facility bond payments from property tax or whatever, then I think we've got to look at that pretty hard, as opposed to just saying, oh, we can't afford the river now, because we've put a burden on that sales tax fund that wasn't expected to be there.
I think, too, in reading some of the information, we initially intended to pay for the field house out of this fund, the debt on the field house. That ended up having to be paid out of the STAR bond funding just because of the way the STAR bonds were written. And we ended up doing streetscape out of here, which is about twice of what the project was going to be out of the field house. So I think there's been some things that have changed in those assumptions from the original.
While we're on the topic and with respect to assumptions, I think one thing that we've identified that we're not addressing in this budget, but just want to put in your consciousness, is there is a designation for vehicles and equipment, but all indicators are it's not enough. And in all honesty, we have yet to put together a schedule, and we talked about it previously, of inventorying our vehicles and equipment and putting together something that kind of amortizes it on an annual basis. When I think we can do that following adoption of the budget and start to have a conversation about if we really want to get vehicles and equipment managed and kind of behind us as a challenge, here's an annual allocation that would be necessary above and beyond what the sales tax fund funds. The other biggest challenge in my estimation is pay raises and the pay plan, which again is not going to be funded by the sales tax fund, and that's a challenge that we're going to have to tackle.
We are moving into the pay plan, so this might be a good opportunity to do citizens quorum, if you need to stop for that.
Yeah, it's 3:45. Do we have anyone that would like to come forward under citizens forum? Okay, if not, we'll carry on.
Okay. More we can get done now, the less we have to talk about later. So the next section that we're going to talk about is the pay plan. The CAPERS rate increased about 0.26% from 8.61% to 8.87% for 2021. KP&F went up about 0.87% from 2193 to 2280. The cost of CAPERS in all funds is roughly $1.385 billion. For CAPERS insurance for all funds, about $156,000. These are all calculated based on no merit increase and no COLA increase. So as we go through and we talk about increases, then these numbers will change. KP&F comes in at a cost of about $2.6 million, and that's all in the general fund. The staffing assumptions for this budget, there's a reconciliation there. The green is positions going in, the red is going out. Ultimately, the bottom line, there was 489 staff positions in the 2021 budget. In 2021, there's 491. Those are really 2 part-time custodial positions in the building and facilities division. The next slide just gives you an example of all of the different pay types that we do currently provide to our employees. Anything from regular overtime, bilingual pay, beeper pay, longevity pay we've spoke about before, but this just gives you a list of all of those benefits and that we do provide currently. The history of our salary increases, as you can see, last year, or in 2020, we did provide a COLA increase of 2%, and we did not include a merit increase at all. Years prior to that, we had the luxury of giving both. And then some of the years before that, we gave merits but not COLAs. But this just gives you a layout of what employees have been doing, or we've been doing over the past 15 years. So then we provided, in this information, we provided you the numbers for 4 options. The first option is to provide 0 merit and 0 COLA, which is what was presented in all of the budget information that we provided you previously. The second option is a 2% merit and a 0% COLA. That would cost a total of about $301,000. About $240,000 of that $1,000 comes out of the general fund. Option 3 would provide a 0% merit, 2% COLA. That would cost about $641,000. And the difference between those two is the COLA gets applied on January 1st. It gets applied to every employee, no matter where they are in the structure. Whereas a merit gets applied at the person's anniversary date, and there are some employees that have maxed out, so they would not be eligible for a merit. The fourth option is 2% merit, 2% COLA, which comes in at a cost of about $948,000. About $760,000 of that comes from the general fund. We also tried to come up with some other options. You could come in at a merit with a different percent, COLA at a different percent, a combination of both at a different percent. We talked about increasing at a flat rate, whether that be an hourly rate or whether that be a flat $1,000 increase per year for employees. The benefit to that, as we saw it, was that employee at a lower level realizes a higher increase because their percentage is going to be higher than somebody at a higher level. We were having difficulty trying to quantify that, but because it's hard to apply without actually applying it. So those are just some of the options that we came up with. A couple of the other options that we wanted to consider were street maintenance worker pay plan adjustments. We would like to consider increases to pay grades, adjusting the starting pay and current pay for some employees. We'd have to look at compression and minimums below the new pay grade minimum. Factors in increased starting pay for vacancies if available to fill. And we believe the estimated impact will be about $29,000 a year plus overtime. Pay plan adjustment for CDL compensation. The proposed model is to provide additional compensation for those who have CDLs and use it in a city role. We would look at something between $1 and $1.50 per hour for their CDL. These positions are subject to call-out for snow and debris removal. It typically only impacts the Public Works Department, and that would be between $141,000 and $212,000 a year, plus overtime. It assumes full staffing and CDL pay for all Public Works divisions, which is about 68 employees.
As I believe you know, we've got vacancies in the Public Works Department we've struggled to fill for quite some time. Just internally within the organization, we've got comparable positions in parks and utilities that are getting a higher pay rate without the need for a CDL, and so it creates an additional competitive disadvantage within our own organization. So we're trying to anticipate that. CDLs are a challenge. I think we've had that conversation before. The state of Kansas says that they have a 100% CDL turnover rate in a year's time. As soon as they can get them trained up, they move on. We struggle to get CDL licensed drivers as well, and we need them for snow plowing in particular. So this is an area of emphasis we're trying to identify a solution for.
What about sanitation workers? Because I know that that's another area where we've had significant challenges finding people to staff, and we often turn to a temporary agency for some of those. Was there any consideration about?
Well, we talked about that, and the challenge there is what we call the runners running behind the truck, not the drivers and CDL licenses. So if we can get automated and get that in place, that's kind of the intended solution. We've been able to make do with temp workers, and so we're continuing. Our intent is to kind of continue that approach until we receive the automated sanitation trucks.
We don't have issues with turnovers because those are CDL drivers also, or no?
Yeah, on the sanitation side, the difficulty we have there is not so much with the drivers as it is the runners behind the trucks. Right, so we're not seeing
significant turnover in drivers, it's the runners.
I mean, Jim's welcome to.
Jim's nodding.
68 includes all divisions in Public Works, so it would include the commercial driver's licenses in sanitation.
Up to
The 68 that she's alluded to in Public Works does include all the different divisions, so it would be not only our streets department, but sanitation and the landfill. So it helps us across the board.
Any other questions or comments about the pay plan?
This pack, probably about 4 more minutes. I don't know how
Well, I was going to say, this is a good place to stop.
Is this a good place to stop? Okay.
Because we're going to start talking about revenues, and we can bring those up in my section in the actual meeting, so it shouldn't take too long, though.
Okay. Thank you. We'll be back in here at 4 o'clock for the regular meeting.